It was a cold, silent winter night when Clara decided to accept the invitation to visit the old castle on the hill, which had been closed for decades. Since she was a child, she had heard stories about the place, a castle shrouded in mystery and supposedly haunted by spirits from ages past. Clara, always fascinated by enigmas and the supernatural, saw the visit as a unique opportunity to unravel the castle's secrets. Upon arrival, the sight of the castle was impressive. The Gothic towers rose imposingly against the night sky, while the moon cast a silvery glow over the ancient stones. A chilly wind blew, making Clara pull her coat tighter around her as she walked up the long cobblestone road that led to the main entrance. The solid wooden door was ajar, as if waiting for her. When she pushed it open, a creak echoed through the vast entrance hall, where dusty chandeliers hung from the high ceiling. Clara felt a shiver as she crossed the threshold, as if she were being watched by unseen eyes. Inside, the castle was shrouded in silent gloom. The antique furniture was covered in white sheets, and a faded red carpet led down the main hallway. Clara turned on her flashlight, and its beam revealed portraits of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to follow her movements. As she moved forward, Clara began to feel an inexplicable presence. The air seemed to vibrate with an ancient energy, and suddenly she heard a peculiar sound, a piano playing softly, coming from one of the side rooms. Following the music, Clara found a ballroom, where a grand piano stood alone in the center. Intrigued, she approached the piano, whose keys moved by themselves, producing a melancholic melody. Feeling a mixture of fascination and fear, Clara touched a key, interrupting the music. The room seemed to sigh, and the temperature dropped drastically, forcing her to retreat. Determined to unravel the castle's enigma, Clara decided to explore the library, a room that, according to legend, contained forbidden books and hidden knowledge. Upon opening the heavy oak door, she found a vast collection of ancient books, whose dusty spines told stories from time immemorial. As Clara examined the domes, one book in particular caught her eye. It was a diary, written by a woman named Eleanor, who appeared to be the last inhabitant of the castle. The pages were filled with notes on rituals and spells, as well as references to a lost love and a pact made in desperation. As Clara read, Eleanor's words revealed a story of love and betrayal. Eleanor, a woman of great beauty and intelligence, had fallen in love with a young knight, but, betrayed by him and fearing loneliness, she had made a pact with dark forces, imprisoning her own soul in the castle so that she would never be alone again. Realizing that Eleanor was still trapped there, Clara felt an irresistible urge to help her find peace. Determined to free her restless soul, she began searching for clues to the ritual described in the diary. As the night wore on, Clara followed the diary's instructions, collecting ingredients mentioned in the writings and arranging them around the piano in the ballroom. The atmosphere was charged, and the castle seemed to be in suspense, as if awaiting the outcome of a long-delayed story. With everything ready, Clara began to recite the words of the spell, her voice echoing off the stone walls of the hall. As she spoke the last words, a soft light enveloped the piano, and Clara felt a warm presence at her side. Eleanor appeared briefly, her face serene and grateful, before disappearing into a golden haze. With the castle now at peace, Clara felt a sense of relief and satisfaction. She knew she had touched something deep and inexplicable, a mystery that had finally found resolution. As she left the castle, the sky began to brighten with the first rays of sunlight, illuminating the ancient structure with a new light. Clara looked back, feeling connected to the past in a way she had never imagined. The castle, with its stories of love and loss, would continue to hold its secrets, but now, without the shadow of restless souls. As she left, Clara carried with her not only a supernatural experience, but also a story of courage and compassion, ready to be told to anyone who would listen. And the castle finally lay in silence, its riddles now part of the wind that blew gently across the hills. It was a cold and gloomy night when Julio decided to accept the challenge of spending the night inside the city's old museum, which was said to be haunted. The museum, once a majestic palace, had been closed to the public for years, but it still maintained its aura of mystery, with legends that spoke of restless spirits roaming the halls after dark. Julio, a curious young man eager for adventure, had always been fascinated by ghost stories and the supernatural. With a backpack full of basic provisions and a powerful flashlight, he headed to the museum as soon as the clock struck midnight. The imposing facade of the building, with its marble columns and tall windows, seemed to be watching him as he approached. The main door was locked, but he found a side entrance open, as if someone was waiting for him. As he walked through the door, he felt a chill run through his body, as if an invisible presence were following him. Inside, the museum was plunged into absolute silence. The air was cold and thick, heavy with the smell of old wood and dust that had accumulated over the years. Julius turned on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the thick darkness, revealing the shapes of statues and exhibits covered in white sheets. He began to explore the vast galleries, admiring the works of art and historical artifacts. Each step he took echoed through the empty hallways, intensifying the feeling of solitude and isolation. However, this tranquility was interrupted by a distant, repetitive sound, a soft ringing that seemed to be coming from upstairs. Intrigued, Julius followed the sound, climbing the marble staircase that led to the second floor. As he walked, the sound became clearer, revealing itself to be the ticking of an old clock. He followed the noise to a room at the end of the hallway, where he found a large grandfather clock, stopped for years, but whose ticking inexplicably echoed. As he studied the clock, he noticed movement in the corner of his eye. He turned quickly and saw a shadow cross the room. His heart raced, but when he shone his flashlight in the corner, he found nothing. Determined not to be easily frightened, he continued his exploration, though a growing sense of unease began to take hold of him. As the night wore on, Julius began to realize that he was not alone. Objects seemed to move of their own accord, and shadows danced on the walls, always out of his direct field of vision. He also began to hear indistinct whispers, as if phantom voices were trying to communicate with him. In the antique gallery, a medieval suit of armor seemed to be watching him, its empty helmet reflecting the lantern light in an eerie way. Julius approached, trying to convince himself that it was just his imagination, but when he turned his back, he heard a metallic sound. He turned quickly, only to see that the visor of the armor was ajar. Increasingly nervous, Julius decided to investigate the basement, where most reports of paranormal activity were located. He descended the narrow stone stairs, the lantern trembling in his hand, aware that he was approaching the heart of the mystery. In the basement, he found a series of dark chambers, filled with ancient and dusty artifacts. It was then that he noticed a wooden door slightly ajar, from which emanated a faint, pulsating light. With a mixture of fear and curiosity, he opened the door and entered. Inside the room, Julius found a scene that defied his comprehension. In the center, a table was covered with a collection of ancient documents and a series of lit candles, their flames flickering as if an invisible breeze were touching them. The walls were covered with strange symbols and drawings, which seemed to tell a story of suffering and despair. He began to examine the documents, which spoke of a group of people who, centuries ago, attempted to perform a ritual to summon ancient spirits, seeking forbidden knowledge. Something had gone wrong, and the souls of those involved were trapped on the threshold between worlds. Suddenly, the candle flames grew brighter, and Julius felt a presence around him. The shadows on the walls began to move in a frantic pattern, and the whispers intensified, turning into a deafening clamor. With his heart racing and his mind in panic, Julius understood that the spirits were yearning for release, but he did not know how to help them. Feeling helpless, he slowly backed away, determined to leave the museum. As he walked away, the shadows and whispers began to diminish, as if the ghosts were accepting his departure. As he emerged from the museum, the cool night air was a welcome relief. He looked back at the dark silhouette of the building, knowing that the museum held ancient secrets, destined to remain forever in the shadows. Julius left, taking with him a story that few would believe, but that he would never forget. The museum, with its unfathomable mysteries, would continue to attract those brave enough to face the ghosts of the past, but Julius knew that not all would return with their souls intact. It was a cold and silent night when Mariana decided to explore the old abandoned hospital on the outskirts of the city. The place, shrouded in urban legends, had always aroused her curiosity. They said it was haunted, and whoever dared to enter would never leave the same. Mariana, a fearless young woman fascinated by mysteries, did not believe in such stories, but she was determined to discover the truth behind the rumors. Upon arriving, the sight of the hospital was intimidating. The broken windows and walls covered in graffiti seemed to tell stories of times gone by. She walked through the main entrance, which was covered in vegetation, and felt a shiver run down her spine when the heavy metal door closed behind her with a bang. Mariana turned on her flashlight and began to explore the dark and dusty corridors. Each step echoed in the sepulchral silence of the place. The air was heavy, and the feeling of being watched was constant. Shadows danced on the walls, projected by the weak light of the flashlight, creating frightening shapes. As she walked, she heard a distant sound, as if someone were whispering her name. She stopped, trying to identify the source of the sound, but all she heard was the beating of her own heart. Determined not to be intimidated, Mariana continued on, entering an old patient ward. In the ward, Mariana found rusty beds and abandoned wheelchairs. There were also medical records scattered across the floor, documents that told stories of patients forgotten by time. As she examined the place, the lights of her flashlight began to flicker, plunging her into intermittent darkness. Suddenly, she heard a metallic noise coming from a room next door. Cautiously, she approached and found a door ajar. She pushed it slowly and saw a medicine cart that seemed to have moved on its own. Feeling a chill down her spine, she began to realize that the hospital was far from empty. Determined to understand what was happening, Mariana decided to head to the basement of the hospital, a place that, according to the stories, was the epicenter of paranormal activity. She went downstairs, with the flashlight trembling in her hand, until she reached a large, dark room. There, she found a series of old televisions, stacked and connected by tangled cables. Suddenly, the screens began to flicker, showing images of patients in the hospital, as if it were a live broadcast from decades ago. Mariana watched, horrified, as the images showed the faces of patients who seemed to recognize her presence. At the height of the suspense, the televisions showed a figure that stood out among the others, a doctor with a cold, empty look in his eyes. He seemed to be addressing Mariana directly, his lips moving in an inaudible whisper. At that moment, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically, and Mariana felt a presence beside her. With her heart racing, she understood that the hospital was a place of pain and suffering, and that restless souls were trapped there, trying to communicate their agony through electronic devices. Feeling overwhelmed, Mariana decided it was time to leave. As she left the hospital, the cool night air was a welcome relief. She looked back at the dark building, knowing she had touched something deep and inexplicable. The abandoned hospital continued to hold its dark secrets, waiting for someone brave enough to listen to its stories of despair and longing. Mariana left, taking with her the memory of a night that would never be forgotten. It was a cold, foggy night when Lucas decided to spend some time alone in the old lighthouse on the peninsula. The imposing structure, with its weathered walls, had fascinated him since he was a child. The lighthouse had been inactive for years, but it still maintained an air of mystery that attracted adventurers and curious people like himself. Lucas arrived at dusk, carrying a backpack full of provisions and a powerful flashlight. As he opened the heavy iron door, he felt a shiver run down his spine. The air inside was cold and damp, with a smell of sea air and aged wood. He climbed the spiral stairs, whose steps echoed with his footsteps, until he reached the watchroom, a circular space with windows that offered a panoramic view of the ocean. With the night already well advanced, Lucas lit a small fire in the center of the room to warm himself. As he watched the dancing flames, he noticed something strange. The shadows projected on the walls did not follow the rhythm of the fire, moving independently, as if they had a life of their own. Intrigued, he approached the shadows, but found nothing that explained the phenomenon. Determined to find out what was happening, Lucas began to search the lighthouse. He found a hidden door, camouflaged among the stones of the wall. After some effort, he managed to open it and revealed a narrow staircase that descended to the basement. With the flashlight in hand, he descended slowly, each step echoing in the darkness. In the basement, Lucas discovered a secret chamber covered in ancient nautical charts and navigational instruments. Among the papers was a weather-beaten journal. Leafing through it, Lucas read about the former lighthouse keeper, a solitary and reclusive man who believed he had discovered a way to communicate with the depths of the ocean. The journal mentioned strange sounds and lights coming from the sea, which the keeper obsessively recorded. As Lucas read, he heard a low, steady sound, like distant chanting, reverberating off the basement walls. He followed the sound to a small stone window that looked out over the sea. Outside, in the darkness, a pulsing light emerged from the waves, as if the ocean were answering the ancient keeper's call. Suddenly, the lantern flickered and went out. The chanting grew louder, almost hypnotic, and Lucas felt a deep chill. Something within the sea seemed to be moving, huge shadows gliding beneath the surface. As the moonlight broke through the clouds, he saw it, glowing eyes and tentacles emerging from the dark waters, reaching toward the lighthouse. Lucas tried to run, but the steps seemed to stretch on forever. The lighthouse shook as if something colossal was about to emerge. He felt something touch his ankle, and in an instant, he was dragged backward with incredible force. His screams echoed through the tower, but no one was there to hear. The next morning, the lighthouse remained unchanged, silent as ever. Its iron door was still ajar, its shadows dancing alone on the walls. Only Lucas's backpack, soaked in salt water and covered in algae, lay on the damp ground, like a silent warning to the next curious person who dared to challenge the lighthouse's secrets. It was a cold, stormy night when Anna found herself alone in the house on the hill. Her parents were away at a wedding, and she had decided to stay behind to take care of the house. Normally, it was a place of refuge, a quiet home on the hilltop, but tonight the silence felt heavy, as if something were lurking. Anna made herself a hot tea and curled up on the couch, trying to ignore the howling wind outside. The sound of rain against the windows was almost comforting, but then there was a distinct noise, something scraping across the floor upstairs. Her heart raced. At first, she thought it was just the old house creaking, but the sound was repetitive, like someone was moving something heavy. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her phone and cautiously climbed the stairs. The hallway was dark except for a faint light leaking from under the guest room door. No one used that room. Trembling, she turned the knob and slowly pushed the door open. The room was empty, but the window was open, letting the wind blow the curtains. Anna felt a shiver run down her spine. Someone had been there. Or maybe they still were. She quickly closed the window and went downstairs, trying to calm her mind. Maybe she had forgotten about the open window before the storm started. Yes, that had to be it. But when she returned to the living room, she stopped abruptly. The chair at the end of the table was overturned, as if someone had suddenly stood up. She didn't remember leaving it like that. The discomfort turned to fear as the lights began to flicker. First a crack, then another, and then complete darkness. The only sound was Anna's rapid breathing and the distant thunder. She grabbed the flashlight from the closet and turned it on, casting a flickering beam of light around the room. That was when she heard a whisper. Low. Almost imperceptible. It was coming from the basement. The basement had always bothered her. The old wood creaked even without wind, the smell of mold and dust was too strong. But now, more than ever, it felt wrong. Still, driven by a mixture of fear and curiosity, she descended slowly, each step protesting under her feet. The flashlight trembled in her sweaty hand. At the bottom of the stairs, something caught her eye. In the dark corner of the basement was a trunk she had never seen before. The leather was cracked, the latches rusted. Anna hesitated. Everything in her instinct screamed for her to go back, but something stronger was pulling her. With trembling hands, he opened the trunk. Inside, he found a sheath of letters and a worn leather journal. Leafing through the pages, he discovered the story of a man named Augustus, the former owner of the house. He was an inventor obsessed with communicating with the dead. The journal detailed his failed attempts and, finally, his final entry, "I succeeded. But they found me too." Anna felt a lump in her throat. A page was scrawled with frantic words, "I'm not alone. They don't want me to go. They want more." A metallic sound echoed in the basement, and Anna froze. The flashlight's light flickered, and in the dim light, something moved. Long, shapeless shadows crept across the walls, twisting unnaturally. The air turned frigid. A whisper cut through the silence. "You open the door." The blood ran cold in her veins. Anna dropped the papers and ran, stumbling down the stairs. When she reached the living room, she tried to call someone, but her cell phone was dead. The lights in the house flickered violently, and then a mirror on the wall reflected something that shouldn't have been there. Behind her, a tall, distorted figure watched her. The face was featureless, just a dark slit where the mouth should have been. Anna tried to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. The last thing she saw was darkness growing around her, until everything disappeared. The next morning, Anna's parents arrived. The door was locked, the house silent. They called their daughter's name, but no one answered. The police were called, and after searching the house, they found only Anna's cell phone in the basement, next to Augusto's diary. The last page of the diary now had a new entry, written in frantic handwriting. "Now there are two of us.